I'm not making this up. 10,000 heat-sinking missiles that are staged on small satellites in orbit. Like that's crazy.
All players, Lowdown, active, bullseye 1327. For tactical. Lights on.
How are you doing? It's been we hadn't had a show just the two of us in a while. We actually tried to get Tim on, but we lost his calendar one. Today it's just us. We actually don't have a guest. We don't have a particular thing. We just want to catch up a little bit. I thought maybe the audience wanted to join in our conversation.
Kind of sad, really, just the two of us, but that's all right.
Yeah. Where do you want to start? You've been busy.
I have been. I realized about a month ago that I had only had maybe 1 week the whole year where I hadn't had any days of travel that week. I just had 2 weeks off from travel and then traveled this week and then traveling next week. But I think the summer travel calendar is a little bit slower than the first part of the year. So I'm looking forward to slowing down just a little bit. And when I say slowing down, I really mean getting to do work instead of travel work.
Oh, I can relate. My day job's been doing the same thing. I can't believe half the year's almost over. It's been a blur for sure. And for those who track the podcast and the show on YouTube, you might notice that our cadence of shows and recordings has gone down considerably. That's because Jake and I are getting pulled in a lot of different directions. So I'm putting in plans in place. I have a virtual assistant. That's been an interesting experience. So I'm working through that to free up some time to get more shows in the books.
Where is your virtual assistant located?
Not in the United States. I couldn't afford it. I would love to onshore that one job and help America out, but I can't afford it.
Well, I was waiting to hear if you were gonna say it's an AI virtual assistant, but they're not quite there yet, really, to do the hard work.
No, I use some workflows and some AI tools, some agentic stuff, but it still requires that like the last 10% human touch. And I just, I've optimized the entire stack as much as I could. And for those of you who just aren't fully aware, this is year 5 of the newsletter and year 3, I think, of the podcast, maybe 2.5, 3. And I've never had an assistant. So every single thing you've heard, watched, or read, I have done every single thing of it, from everything from the YouTube thumbnails to production to writing every word in every newsletter that you read. I just do it all myself. So yeah, I was getting pulled a few directions. Need to rack and stack some priorities, and yeah, here's where we're at. So we'll see. The second half of the year better be better than the first half of the year. It can't get any worse.
I think we'll have more time.
I think so. Yeah, I'm hopeful. So we throw together a few topics, and we're just going to go see what happens. Roll the bones. Where do you want to start?
We could start with the fundraising environment. Talk about that.
Let's start with that. You have personal experience. If you want to share what you can, what you want, and we can kind of go from there.
Sure. As you know, I am a fund manager, which means that I get to spend and have the privilege to invest in people building really cool things. I get to play with their toys in diligence. That also means I have to raise money from the market. Venture capitalists are the ultimate middlemen. Very few VCs are investing their own money. I take that back. Almost every VC is investing their own money. It is usually only a small part of the money that they're investing. They are also investing other people's money. So I spend my whole life either fundraising or investing. So I am sort of in the middle of the equation.
You're convincing people to give you money, and then you're listening to people convince you to give them that money.
Yes.
You are. You really are just a middleman.
It's maybe the highest prestige middleman job in America. Can you think of a middleman job that's more prestigious?
No, not really. I mean, if you listen to J. Cal, he would call it a capital allocator, right? That's the church it up name.
Yeah. Usually when people say allocator, they mean limited partners, the people who give us money.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Although I think from the technical definition of the word, we allocate capital too. If you want to get philosophical about it, right? Like every job, every person should have a role in society, like some benefit they grant to society. And so you'd say, well, what is the social role of a VC? And the answer is if you live in a society with excess capital, and that capital could be money or time or resources or manufacturing equipment, you need to decide how the excess capital gets allocated most efficiently. And maybe someday in the future, it'll be some giant AI that just calculates where money should flow. But today, those decisions get made by investors, and venture capitalists are one type of investor. So I take excess capital from pensions or universities or high net worth individuals and then try and decide where the smartest place to put that money is. Just a middleman. That's it.
But you take their money and it's I mean, these are 10-year cycles, right? That you take the money because then you got to deploy it, and then that where you put it has to grow into something, and then to get the money back and repay the investment, right?
Yep. Yeah, usually in funds last 10 years, you invest the money over, let's say 3, and then the next 7 years, you're helping the companies and trying to harvest your investments. But I'd say these days, fund life is more like a 12 to 14 year life cycle. It's just a lot slower than it used to be.
You don't have to say because I don't think you're ready to share yet your fund size that you're working on right now. But I mean, how many bets do you make in a fund?
Well, it depends on your particular strategy, but it also partially depends on the stage. So if you're a late stage investor, you're investing in Series D rounds or right before IPO, you might invest in 10 companies in a fund or 8 companies, so like relatively concentrated. But you're not expecting any of your investments to go to zero, right? All your investments are at that point relatively de-risked, or maybe one goes to zero or two go to zero, but really the majority of your investments should return at least the principal. If you are investing at the idea stage or 2 people in a garage, then you might have 60 or 70 or 80% of your companies go to zero. And so those portfolios might be much larger, 40 companies in a fund or 50 companies or something like that, which would be a very diverse set. Sometimes it's called a spray and pray approach, which I think is is not complementary to that strategy, but certainly is one potentially effective strategy. I think for us, we'll be targeting something like 15 to 25 investments. So call it 20.
So investing, and then there's defense tech investing, it's like another level of the game, right? It's like you put it on ultra hard mode because there's the information disadvantage, right? That you have, and you have a very peculiar customer, and it's a monospony, right? Is that the word?
Monopsony?
Yeah, that thing.
Sounds like monopoly, but it's not. But it's similar.
It's like the opposite,
The
right?
opposite.
So you've been doing this a minute or two, and I'm on your investor distro, so I see what you communicate to people who want to listen to what you're doing at Mark Ventures, and it sounds like you got an above average hit rate. Maybe not home runs and grand slams yet, but definitely a pretty high batting average.
So far, so good. We are substantially above the benchmarks, so we're pretty excited. We haven't returned capital to investors yet, right? It's looking good, but we haven't done that yet.
Reference 12 to 14 year cycle, right?
Yeah. We're going to beat that. I'll be shocked if we don't beat it. But my thesis actually is that defense is harder than other sectors you can be investing in or other industries you can be investing in, or easier, which is to say, like, if you are a generalist, it is much harder because there are a lot of traps, but it is also a more deterministic market if you know what you're looking for. So if you can find the requirements and can track the congressional spending and talk to members of HASC and SASC and their staffs and understand where their thinking is, and you're sort of deep in the networks, I think that you can actually de-risk your investments in defense more than you can investments in other spaces. And that's partially because the acquisition life cycles take so long. Everything moves so slowly that there's actually a lot of paper trails for you to run down.
So you think with acquisition reform or PPBE reform that advantage starts to change a little bit?
Maybe the advantage changes a little bit, but I think it's just like new rules to the same game.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good way to put it.
If we ever get to where the services are buying, ACAT 1 programs on a credit card, then it'll look more like the rest of the VC market, but we're never going to get to that world.
It's interesting, the process. So ACAT, acquisition category 1, that's your most expensive stuff, right? It takes 2 years to basically build the budget. So we're recording this in June of 2025. For an example, the 2027 budget is being finalized right now as we're sitting here recording. And you go backwards from that, that means that the requirements and the staffing to actually justify establishing that budget line item and everything was another 2 years ahead of time. So yeah, this is one of the things you can forecast it if you know where to hunt. You know where requirements are being shaped, and you have capabilities-based assessments, things that go into forming the requirements, which then gets to validate, which then gets to be in the funding. So it's a very predictable model if you know where to look. You can have some really, really good insights of what people are looking for a few years out.
To put that in perspective, that would mean you'd trace it all the way back to sometime in 2022, maybe early 2023. And if people had over-rotated on the Ukraine conflict at the time, the big concern probably would have been artillery pieces. And so maybe the ACAT 1 program rolling out in 2027 would be a replacement for the Paladin system or something like that, which is, you don't hear a whole lot about artillery these days, right? It's all FPV drones and the related technology. And so you'd be fielding something completely obsolete. But you wouldn't even be fielding it until, I don't know, 2029 or 2030 or...
We could talk about drones, being a disruptor or not, but I don't think artillery is going away. Like was it General Rainey about a year ago? He had a really good quote about 155.
The UAVs dropping grenades is eye candy on Twitter, but HE 155 is still the big killer. When we entered the information age, we did not leave the industrial age.
FPV is not going to replace the density of a 155, which may be true for now, right?
No one knows for sure, right?
Yeah. Okay, let's talk fundraising. Anduril, this week, they raised another $2.5 billion. That brings them at almost a $31 billion valuation, which is, for context, that's like half the size of like Northrop Grumman and General Dynamics. That's a massive valuation. Thoughts?
I'm trying to look right now to see how much Anduril has raised, at least publicly announced, in total. Oh, I'm not going to be able to do math live.
Just read it off. What are you reading? What do you got?
All right. The C, they raised $200 million. At the D, $450 million. So we're at $650. The E, $1.5 billion. So let's call that $2 billion. Series F, $1.5 billion. That's $3.5 billion total. And then Series G, $2.5 billion. So maybe $7 billion in total is what's publicly reported. If I had all the data in front of me,
that's not a little bit of money.
It's not a little bit of money.
It's not a little bit of money.
Let's see. They're valued at $30 billion. I'm confident they're getting investor pressure to take the company public. They have to take it public, or at least attempt to take it public at a higher valuation than where they just raised. So let's say at a $50 billion valuation. So how do you justify a $50 billion valuation if you're Anduril?
I don't know. You're the investor. You have to tell me. I do know that they did generate something like $1.1 billion in revenue last year, but I'm sure they're private, just like all venture-backed companies. So if they were profitable, they wouldn't be private. They'd be public and you cash out, right? So they're not profitable yet. And the raise that they just closed, that's like less than a year after their last round, right? Which I think is also maybe that's an indicator. Maybe it's an indicator they have something big they're cooking, or they need the money real bad. I'm not sure which one it is.
I think it could be neither.
Oh, okay.
I think Anduril's valuation doesn't make sense. So we'll start there. I think it's too high. I think someone at Anduril would push back and say, no, it's definitely not. Look at Palantir, like their, multiple is a lot higher than our multiple. You say, okay. I think if you are T. Rowe Price or, I don't know, Goldman Sachs, and you have a lot of your clients wanting to invest in defense tech, the only company you can really invest in that's like a blue chip private in defense tech is probably Anduril, maybe Shield. The options are limited. And those clients want to invest big checks, $100 million, $200 million at a time. And so because the market is so constrained, I think there's a supply and demand imbalance for defense tech
Interesting.
right now. And Anduril's the only game in town. So I think that's driven their valuation up artificially. And then because their valuation is artificially high, which I think in their heart of hearts they could acknowledge, it makes sense for them to be acquisitive and to buy cool technology from interesting defense tech companies that don't have the brand recognition and don't have the same multiple.
That press release did say it was an oversubscribed round, which is like banker talk for we were able to raise more from investors than we were actually looking for, right?
Yeah. So I think they're raising more money than they need to do acquisitions. And there's an arbitrage for them because their valuation is so high right now.
That's an interesting problem to have. I mean, it's a good problem to have because now you have, I say a blank check, but you have a big pocketbook that you can go shopping for companies, which has kind of been, I don't want to say that's been their entire like growth strategy, but they were very deliberate of how they used M&A to enter different markets that they wanted to be in. I mean, if we're to play in how to win is a big part of your strategy, like how do you get into the market? It's a whole nother discussion. So where do you think they're going to go into next if they're going to buy some more stuff?
It's a good question. I've heard they're making a strong play for Golden Dome, a large part of Golden Dome, which makes sense. I mean, if you are Anduril and you think you have to go public at a 50 billion plus valuation, what programs are out there right now that can get you there? I think Golden Dome is maybe it. You're already competing in CCA. You're not going to be competing for NGAD or the Navy hasn't their version of the F-47 yet, right? So
I think that program is going to go on a 3 or 4 year delay.
I'd go with space. I think
Space, yeah.
I think some aspect of Golden Dome is what they're going to go after.
Man, what a perfect time to close around, right? Right. I think you want to talk about Golden Dome?
What do you think of Golden Dome? Is this Star Wars all over again? Like, be a boondoggle?
I'm not exactly sure what to think yet, for a few reasons. Okay, here's my take on Golden Dome. So for listeners, it's the effort to protect America from air and space threats, namely hypersonics, ballistic missiles, and things like cruise missiles. So it has a few different concepts: space-based sensors, layers of interceptors, both from the ground and from space, which makes it crazy in a tech sense. So maybe crazy conceptually, but the timeline is crazy. So they announced it in January. The RFI, the request for information, went to industry the next month, February. Just last month, May, they down selected the actual design of what they want to do to go build. This month, probably like when this pod is coming out, they're going to host an industry summit to go and share the concept with industry. And then they're going to start writing checks. And they want a demo in 2028, which is like lightning fast for the scale of this thing. They want to field it in 29 and then go to like full operational capability up in the like 2031 timeframe, something like that. That is, that's crazy. That's crazy ambitious. And you get there by just throwing crazy amounts of money at it, right? So the cost, and have you seen some of these projections of what they're looking at for cost?
I think I saw somewhere between $500 billion and $1 trillion.
175 billion is the contract vehicle that they've established. but that's not the full thing. When you include like the full like O&M for 20 years of fielding this thing, so it's 2025, so you go out to 2045, that's like $800 billion is the current cost estimate. And that's obviously that's just a wag. It's just a wild ass guess because, you know, no one's built anything yet. So I guess the problem I have is like just to even get this thing started, you know, there's the $25 billion that is in Congress, but I mean, number one, like just getting that through Congress looks like to be a big pain in the ass. And that's like a fraction of what you actually need to like make this real. So we need to do something. This is maybe trying to eat the whole elephant at the same time. I don't know.
Do we need it? I mean, why do you think they're trying to build it now?
Let's back this up. Let's zoom out a little bit and a little bit of history. So Star Wars, which was the SDI Strategic Deterrence or Defense Initiative.
Strategic Defense Initiative, yeah.
There you go. Yeah, SDI. So which got canceled, didn't really work, but there was a program called Smart Rocks. And then out of Smart Rocks, there was another program.
Brilliant Pebbles. I love the
Brilliant
name.
Pebbles. Yeah, good name. It was a play on Smart Rocks. Brilliant Pebbles. So you know what it is then, right, Jake?
I mean, vaguely. Not as you go. I love the name.
Yeah, it's a great name. Yeah, Brilliant Pebbles. It was a program in the 80s, like late 80s, and it came out of the Smart Rocks program, which was in the early 80s. And this was space-based ballistic missile defense using, I'm not making this up, 10,000 heat-sinking missiles that are staged on small satellites in orbit. Like that's crazy. And they were going to do the whole program for 20 billion back then. That's B 20 billion. But then as it went into actually got contracted and they were going into like building the prototypes and production. And the reason it was expensive at the time is they couldn't even get the stuff in the orbit, right? Because launch costs were still high. So that's one thing that has changed. But it got canceled because the Soviet Union collapsed. So it got canceled in 1993 as part of the bottom-up review. So we went from we need to build something, and then they're like, well, you know, world peace. I guess we don't need to build it. And then from 1993 until, you know, now, call it another 30 years, we kind of like just been coasting along with no defenses. I mean, can the United States protect itself from a ballistic missile attack? Sort of, right? So it's optimized against one or two rogue nations, not state-on-state conflict. If someone really wanted to put a dent in America, like there's really not much stopping it.
Yeah.
So for that, yeah, we definitely need something. I completely agree. We need to do something. But is it this? I don't know.
Right. Like the current system is what? It's in Alaska, and like it's like 2 or 3 facilities for the ground-based defense against ballistic missiles.
This is also where the floating radar is.
Right.
The huge floating radar off the looks like an oil platform with a big dome on top. Yeah. They put it out in the ocean so we can actually track the trajectories from, because they're ballistic and you know where they're coming from or what they're planning for. So you just put these radars to look in a certain direction. Yeah.
And I think the success rate is around, we'll call it 50%. I'm sure the exact success rate is classified.
Yeah, you only have like one. It's like Eminem. You only got one shot. So yeah, and most of these things, you guys understand how this works. You have like MIRVs, and you have decoys, and so you're shooting like a lot to get one just to make sure, because you only have one shot. It just comes like risk reductions and probabilities. You know, it might be maybe it's 5 to 1, maybe it's 10 to 1. You know, so you start running into like this issue where the defense is not scalable under the current construct, but it's workable if the threat is very, very manageable. You can just like, okay, that's a good strategy. But if the threat becomes like bigger, the defense is not scalable. Right. And I think that's the kind of problem that everyone's acknowledging now.
You know, arguably it was a fine defense early in North Korea's nuclear program, probably not even effective against them today if they decided to do a full launch of everything they've got. It would maybe be effective against rogue nation or terrorist group or an accidental launch of a missile or two, right?
Maybe.
Maybe.
Hope.
We should have an expert on nuclear deterrence in. Because then the other question is, if we build this and it's effective, what does that do to mutually assured destruction regime? And is it potentially more destabilizing vis-a-vis China or Russia than the current reality? And I don't know. I'm no expert in the dark arts of nuclear deterrence, but
I did a fellowship when I lived in DC under the I don't remember what it was anymore. It was a non-proliferation nuclear. I was like, man, this is probably going to be a big snore fest, but I'm going to go and learn about it anyways. And it was interesting. I did learn a lot. But yeah, the calculus of how you keep deterrence but not have escalation, but also like you want to be able to sleep well at night. I'm glad I don't have that job.
we live in interesting times.
For sure. The other thing that's interesting about the Golden Dome, this really good article that came out this past week, was when you look at the radars on the ground, there's a certain band that radars that need to look way up operate in that are optimized for. That's the S band. It's like the 3.1 gig region. Well, all that band is getting auctioned off right now by the FCC for commercial use. And unless they buy it back or cancel they got like eminent domain for Spectrum or something, like bring it back, the Department of Defense does not own the spectrum that they operate on. The FCC does. You know the story of the B-2 bomber?
What story?
The radar in the B-2 bomber. So the FCC had sold the frequency spectrum that the B-2's original radar operated on, and they refused to let the Department of Defense use it anymore because they had sold it to a commercial company, and they didn't get like an easement or some kind of waiver to use it. So the B-2 program had to put a new radar in the B-2 that operated at a different frequency range because the FCC sold off the frequency spectrum.
Wild.
Yeah. These are the things that you just like, what? That can't be real.
Can't be real. And yet it is.
Yeah. So so right now the S-band spectrum, keep an eye on that. You're definitely going to want that frequency range for radar. So we'll see how that gets deconflicted. And because the things you're looking for are like so tiny and they're moving so fast, you can't share that spectrum because it's just going to have so much like noise in your signal. Your capabilities, your radars are actually going to go down if everyone's just emitting the same kind of frequency spectrum all around you. So it actually really is important to fence off that frequency range.
So are you saying I should make a play on this auction and then gouge the department?
Sell it back to Golden Dome. 10% of the entire program is buying frequency spectrum back, right?
Not buying, leasing.
Leasing. That's right. Leasing it, right? Yeah. It's man, all these weird things that you hear right across the space. Speaking of weird things in the space, I too have come across a post on LinkedIn that went viral this weekend, which sounds funny when you say it out loud. Like there are things that go viral on LinkedIn. You wouldn't think so, but it's a thing. You want to go with this one? Because we saw the same thing and you'd said it to me. I was like, oh yeah, we got to talk about this.
No, you take it. I will say that I like to post spicy posts. I read this and like my first thought was, wow, this is the spicy post for the week. I'm not even going to try and compete. We're just going to let this one fly.
Just let it, just share it. It deserves to be shared. So the post was is it James Acuna? Is that how you say his name? Yep. James Acuna. So it started with DIU is a national embarrassment. Stop calling it innovation. And it had a picture and a bunch of other words below it. And that was on, I think, Saturday or something like that. And then he followed it up, I think, this morning or the next day with, doubling down on it, which is like, man, like it's definitely a spicy take. Something about not delivering results. It's not in Ukraine. And you post a lot about drones in Ukraine. And so there's the saying, you stand where you sit, right? Because that's the lens he's looking at this from. Like, totally get it. There's not a whole lot of DIU stuff in Ukraine. And so, is it a national embarrassment? Maybe, maybe not. Should you stop calling it innovation? Maybe, maybe not. What do you think?
He's got this great line, which is, no one in Ukraine or Gaza is winning fights with DIU-funded toys. They're winning with real tools built fast, fielded dirty, and improved in blood. And it reminded me of the quote from the last ANS secretary. I'm blanking on his name.
This is like the Tech Bros quote.
Yeah, he's like, look, I'll use some liquored up story about, what they're doing in Ukraine, and the tech bros aren't doing shit. It's, 155 shells. This is basically the rehash of that, right? And anecdotally, I think it sort of rings true from what I hear from folks who are fighting in the Ukrainian Foreign Legion and, come back and share stories. It's not American tech that they're using. And it's not because American tech is just more expensive. It's because it's not up to the task in Ukraine. Ukraine's got very specific requirements, and it's mostly homegrown stuff that's getting used there.
You got to be there, right?
Yep.
Like at the end of the day, you got to be there to be there. Man, so many stories. I mean, I can relate it. I did 5 combat deployments, and you're there. You understand because you're living in it, like the nuances of everything going on. People try to understand it in a report or something, and then they just don't. Sometimes they get it. They're like, oh yeah, there's obviously things going. And sometimes just don't get it. And like, dude, I don't have time to explain this to you. You need to be here to be here. So yeah, I appreciate that. I also appreciate that it's innovate or die in the literal sense. So the forcing function for the pace of innovation, which is, it's still, we're going on year 3 now, right? And it's every 2 weeks, there's another evolution. And again, if you're there, you can see like there's an inflection moment of like, okay, this is the next wave of innovation. And then a couple of weeks go by and it's like, okay, here's the next wave of innovation. And it keeps happening. It's like the fiber. So it went from GPS to like, okay, now we're going to use the optical, the fiber guides, and see, I have the spools. There's companies everywhere sending the spools there. Have you seen the latest? I saw another startup. It is a object detection device that actually can see the fiber optic cable. And then it basically just the drone just tracks the fiber optic cable, which is like almost invisible to the naked eye. It uses some kind of filters and cameras. And it goes back to the point of origin. You've probably seen Ukraine, like there's, millions of miles of fiber just all over the place now from just spider webs. And I did see a couple birds have started making nests out of it. Have you seen that?
I saw the bird's nest pictures.
Yeah.
It spawned a lot of discussion of birds aren't real. And here's the proof. You've got the fiber optic charging nests for the birds. Yeah, I had heard early on when fiber was getting deployed in Ukraine, people were trying to shoot a laser down the line and then track the lines to the point of origin. I hadn't heard that they were using computer vision at it to track the fiber optic lines.
The laser back to the point of origin didn't make sense to me because number one, you would have to like get your hands on a laser and an intact fiber cable that wasn't somehow like, broken. And then by the time you could figure out where it came from, that person's gone. I mean, no one's staying in that position. So we'll see what happens with this. I'll post a video here in the thing when I put it on YouTube. But I think actually James weighed in and he was like, I don't believe it. I'm like, well, like it looks like it could be a thing, right? You can track it and then you can actually like intercept these things while they're still like in mid mission and go back to the point of origin. You kill the archer, right? Shoot the arrows down.
If the tracking part isn't easy, I mean, just taking out the fiber optic lines would be an effective method of interfering with the drones.
But I also got to imagine, because there's, again, like a million optical like FPV series have been flown, the amount of like just noise and decoys of lines, I don't even know how you would solve for that.
Yeah, it's a good point. Goes back to you got to be there to be there.
Yeah, I mean the demo looks great, but it's like a green grass background. It's not a very complex background to track one string through. So yeah, I have a couple other be there to be there Ukraine stories, but I can't share them.
So the other part of James's LinkedIn post is really criticism of DIU as an organization, right? Ukraine is one example, but I think his post is broader than that. So what do you think of DIU? We're DIU 3.0 now. Doug Beck's been in the seat for at least 2 whole years, maybe longer than that. Making big changes for the better?
Well, first things first, Doug's on the naughty list because we have not been able to schedule him to come on the show. So I'm just going to get that out of the way right now.
Sure. Personal grudge.
Like, personal grudges aside, yeah, DIU this year, this August, will be 10 years. 10 years ago it started. So I think it's a good point to reflect back, right? We're on DIU 3.0. I'll probably get this wrong. 1.0 was like the first, call it 2 years, which was like get people to just think differently, which means you got to be around people who think differently. And then DIU 2.0 was we're going to try a bunch of things. And so hundreds, I think 450 prototypes they have contracted in DIU 2.0. And then DIU 3.0, which is like, how do we actually like deliver stuff? To the point that Doug Beck took over and DIU 3.0 he launched, and that's a year and a half ago, right? Something like that. Maybe 2 years. I guess this is the year of like deliver or not, right?
I mean, last year they got the big budget plus up, right? Billion-ish
Yeah.
dollars. Next year they're slated to have a similar amount of funding, a little bit more.
I will say this, like, you could throw money at a problem. It doesn't mean it's innovation, right? Like you can't innovate out of constraints, which is one of the ways that Ukraine's innovating, right? Innovate or die, but also they're constrained, which is forcing them to think in different creative ways for adaptation. You know, like at Replicator, we'll see what happens with that. I mean, aren't we like 2 or 3 months away from like hitting this magical milestone that they had set out to do?
Oh, I didn't even remember.
I think August of 25 was the goal to field thousands of these drones. But the way they were doing it was like, you know, we'll take 1 or 2 like loitering munitions that were developed in the U.S. This is like pre-conflict in Ukraine. And like that entire market has evolved like probably 2 or 3 generations since the Replicator even started, right? And you're stuck in a cost structure of maybe these loitering munitions that cost $150,000-$200,000 a piece, when now you can do loitering munitions for under 50, right?
Yep.
So it's a really interesting conundrum. Again, I'm glad I'm not in charge.
I mean, some of the Replicator funding went to, as you said, pre-existing platforms. Not then the cutting edge, certainly not the cutting edge today. And programs that were already sort of in the works before Replicator was announced. They got kind of rebranded as Replicator, but
Oh yeah.
but they weren't new starts for sure.
Yeah, they did not start from zero. But, you know, back to the original point, you know, it's 10 years. And DIU is just, you know, one thing, right? There's innovation organizations kind of everywhere. I think you're going to see the reckoning is going to be coming. That's my prediction this year. You're going to see a consolidation of innovation organizations, and you're going to see them transform into kind of performance outcome-based organizations. That's my prediction. And I don't even think it's going to take to the end of the year. I mean, we're in June right now. You know, by October, just kind of thumb in the wind. I think you're going to see some changes start happening before that. I could be wrong. I could be completely wrong. I mean, I don't think I am, but I could be completely wrong.
I think you're right. I mean, if you look at how many innovation organizations exist in the DoD, depending on how you define it, it's like 200 plus organizations.
I don't know what the right number is, but I know it should not end with 100.
Yeah.
It's certainly not 200.
I tried to do the back of the envelope math, I don't know, a few months ago. It's like, what is it, like 11 COCOMs? So if you take the services and the combatant commands, and then you give OSD a few organizations like OSC or DIU that are sort of across the organization, and then maybe you include the service labs so you don't penalize the services for their labs. I mean, you still end up with like 25 organizations or something. And then it's really hard to think about where other organizations should get shoehorned in, where the missions aren't duplicative.
Yeah. And what you end up with is you end up with an interactive space that's just so broad that no one really is communicating with everyone. If you're running a defense company, you want to go talk to an innovation organization, they're like, well, Like, it depends. There, I have my own thoughts of like the fact that you have to call yourself an innovation organization is a problem itself, right? You should just, the results should speak for itself. Shouldn't have to declare it. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't even know where to start. There's so many places to go and who to talk to, who actually has contract vehicles and contract officers, who actually has like budget authority, who actually has like a budget. A lot of these places have innovation, but they're not connected to budgeting or follow through. Like, who is actually going to transition this, which is a whole different conversation that no one really talks about. Is the .mil PFP, ABCDEFG, whatever you call it, doctrine, operations, logistics, training, like all of those considerations, besides just give me a contract for my, cool tech, that a lot of these organizations maybe haven't been as thoughtful of when you're looking at actually fielding and scaling a capability to the end user. It's hard. It's hard to field stuff.
I mean, no startup has ever thought of the whole .mil PF spectrum, sustainment, like you said, training and all that stuff. Never. It's just not on anyone's radar.
And it's a shame when you actually look at, like, again, the future could look different from the past. But traditionally, when you look at how the military buys and operates things, like 70% of the value of technology is after it's fielded. So you would think if, you're a startup, you'd be thinking of the whole value chain of like, man, if 70% of this revenue is on the back end after the guy or gal gets, this in their hands to use it, I would really be optimizing to capture all of it. It's just weird to me that not enough startups or defense tech companies think about the back end.
Yeah. There's a lot of O&M money out there that most startups completely ignore, right? They're just thinking about selling the widget or selling the software. It's not the services on the back end. There's a lot of money to be had in those services. And maybe some of that is because, VCs have traditionally not liked services businesses. It's kind of a dirty word. It makes them think of low margin, low growth sort of stuff. But
yeah, it's low margin, but man, you can, if you're going to have to sustain something for 10 or 20 years, that's called backlog, which is, you have predictability and revenue it's a whole other thing. Okay. We're getting short on time. I want to end on one topic, and I'm going to let you lead it because you sent me a text about it, and it was drones. Is that what really matters? Did we get it all wrong?
So my starting point here is we usually get it wrong when we try and predict what the next conflict will look like. So we're all looking at Ukraine right now and looking at what China's doing and predicting that small, attritable, autonomous vehicles will predominate the next conflict. But maybe we're wrong. And one of the things that got me to this line of thinking is I started thinking about the offset strategies. So the US has had 3 offset strategies, currently in the 3rd offset strategy. The first offset strategy was post-World War II, early Cold War, and it was nuclear weapons. So the US essentially was confronted by the fact that we did not have the bodies or the tanks to stop the Soviets if they decided to invade Europe. And so our offset, our way of addressing that, was to use nuclear weapons. That's why we've never had, or at least originally didn't have, a no first use policy. We still don't have a no first use policy, but we were willing to use nuclear weapons, arguably, to stop the Soviets. So that was offset strategy 1. Offset strategy 2, a program called the Salt Breaker, was the use of precision weapons. So in World War II, it took about 9,000 gravity bombs to hit a target. So to have like a 90% likelihood of hitting your exact target. That's quite bad. In sort of Korea, Vietnam, the numbers got better and better even before we had precision weapons. But now it's, 1 weapon, 2 weapons to hit your target, right? Laser guided bomb, something like that, right? And again, that was an offset because instead of having to build and drop 10,000 bombs, we can now use 1 cruise missile to do the same thing, have the same effect. If you think about it, the US spent almost a century, 80 years, something like 80 years, trying to avoid the need for mass, the need for numbers. And that was with nuclear weapons and then precision weapons. All right. 3rd offset, Bob Work predicted He was the Undersecretary of Defense, I think, or Deputy Secretary of Defense. His idea was the third offset. I think it's harder to define than nuclear weapons or precision weapons, but sort of a set of policies and procedures, think DIU, that would keep us on the cutting edge of technology, maybe sprinkle a little of AI in there, and that would be maybe even the final offset. Like that would keep us ahead of adversaries. It's a little bit more of an amorphous concept, but I would argue that he got it wrong, and the third offset has turned out to be attritable mass. So mass manufacturing, autonomy, cheap. And that we lost the race to the third offset because we got it wrong, and that China won that race. So we should try and catch up, do our best. But almost by definition, if we catch up, even if we pull ahead, which I think arguably is going to be quite difficult, it's no longer an offset because they're already there. And so we should be thinking as a nation about the fourth offset. What is the thing that is totally orthogonal to affordable, autonomous mass that could win the next conflict? And that definitionally means it's not small drones, it's something else. And I don't have the answer to that. But this is the line of thinking I'm going down right now, and trying to think about how we get ahead of the next thing and make the third offset the shortest lived offset. Because, like I said, I don't think we've won it. I think at best we can get to parity.
Oh, so many thoughts. This is a good way to end the conversation. So yeah, if you think what's going on in Ukraine applies to what you can do in the Pacific, whether it's the South China Sea or the Taiwan Straits, like, you are sadly mistaken. The dynamics are way different. The Sun Tzu has the 6 types of terrain. So like there's I can't remember what they all are, but one of them is like standoff, like, long distances to cover, and 2 or 3 of them you could probably like categorize as what's going on in Ukraine. It's like entangled terrain, available terrain where you have easy access to them, but there's no advantage, and basically it ends up with a stalemate, which is kind of what you see in no man's land in Ukraine. But to your point about mass, like, what's the offset of mass? Like, that's a really good path to go down. The thing about the principles of war, mass is mass. Like, how do you offset mass? You use one of the other principles of war, right? At some point, it's sacrificing something, whether it's economy of force or simplicity. I would start with a macro level of like, how do you offset mass? Like, well, I need to use a different principle. And depending on what country you're at, the list changes just a little bit. But I would start with the principle level and then kind of go from there. I would not start at the tech level. I think that's a terrible idea, because the principles kind of endure. How you do it changes. It's actually timely. I'm about halfway through this book right now called Origins of Victory. Have you read that book?
Yeah, I read it, I don't know, early this year, I think. Late last year.
It's like 400 or 500 pages. It's a pretty thick book. About halfway through. I'm in the 1890s to 1908 time frame with the invention of the torpedo.
I was just gonna say it's the torpedo, right? Which
It's
is
fascinating.
Yep.
The thing, the Reader's Digest version, because it's fresh in my mind, is in the 1860s, someone in France invented the gyroscope. And in the 1880s, someone had figured out, like, and torpedoes had been around for a little bit, but not really useful because they couldn't really go far because they would just veer off course. So they were not accurate. Someone was like, what if I put the gyroscope in the torpedo? And that set off this torpedo revolution. This is before they had them in subs. It was ships shooting them. And the range of the torpedo ended up changing the shape of basically the fighting navy, which then created the battleship. And all these things had led down this path of like, well, now I need all the guns to be the same caliber, because when they splash at 8,000 yards, I can see where they splash and I can adjust fire. If they're all different caliber, I can't really tell where the splash is. So it created these like big guns, lots of the same type of big guns shooting the same direction. And it was really to outstick the torpedo. That's where the whole battleship revolution came from. I was like, I never knew that. That was fascinating. One thing, led to another. And then, that's how you get the battleship. And then we know what happened in World War II, the carrier. So.
Yeah. And the carrier really only rose to prominence maybe because of Pearl Harbor, right? If the battleships hadn't gotten sunk, I think it would have taken a lot longer for us to figure out that the carrier had more uses than we thought it did.
I think regardless of whether the battleships got sunk or not, the fact that they were attacked from Japanese carriers was kind of like the big point, right? Like, I guess they're we weren't expecting that.
Sort of an awakening moment, sure.
Yeah. It's kind of like Ukraine this last week, maybe the Pearl Harbor moment for drones in the entangled terrain kind of scenario where you have thousands of drones, surprise attack.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. I think both that attack and the Israeli pager operation, I think that happened since our last recording too. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it's been a while. Yeah, they both have happened. Yeah.
Are really interesting examples of tactics. And I don't know if it's getting inside your opponent's OODA loop or if it's using reflexive control, but their ability to stack effects based on their opponent's predictable reactions to their attack. So like the pager attack, for instance, the reason Hezbollah was using pagers is because the Israelis could listen in on all their cell phone conversations. And the Israelis knew that, and so they attacked the pager supply chain. But then what they also did is they went after radios because they knew as soon as the pager attack happened, the next step would be for Hezbollah to move to radios. And so there was a smaller but a follow-on attack on radios.
Yep.
And in Ukraine, we had the attack on the long-range bombers because Ukraine arguably knew they were about to get used in a strike on Ukraine again. And then Ukraine attacked again at other air bases where Russia had to move remaining strategic bombers, presumably knowing that that is exactly what Russia would have to do. Those bombers are quote-unquote dual-use bombers. So they do carry non-nuclear weapons. That's why they've been attacking Ukraine, or they've been used to attack Ukraine with non-nuclear weapons. So how does the treaty affect the dual-use platforms? Like the B-1 bomber was originally a nuclear bomber. I believe now we have said it's just a conventional bomber, right? So we've tried to take it off that list of nuclear bombers. Are we supposed to park them in the open, or because we say we don't use them for nukes no more?
Those don't matter because they're not. The B2s, interesting, the B2s do matter, but they stay inside of like an air-conditioned hangar, so that's kind of weird, right? So, I don't know. I did a fellowship a while ago. Don't blame me.
We need
schools for fools.
We need a nuclear expert. You need a nuclear expert.
Yeah, you need a nuclear expert. I do know that the B-52 fleet is like only certain B-52s are wired to carry nuclear weapons. So I think, say there's 75 B-52s, there's like 40 that actually are nuclear capable, and the other 35 aren't. They're just not wired for it, or they took the wiring out. I don't know how that's tracked or managed, nor do I know how you would signal that, hey, that was a nuclear capable one, or that's not, or you like obfuscate it. Like, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's like Israel's nuclear posture. Maybe we have nukes, maybe we don't. You don't want to find out, all right? Which may historically be like the ultimate punk card, 100 years from now, and you realize, oh, they didn't have nukes the whole time, really? But, or maybe they do.
Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Strategic ambiguity.
That's what it is. That's the word I'm looking for. See, you went to class, I didn't. All right, I think that's a good place to end.
That's the pod. Man, really a lot has happened since we've gotten together.
Why don't we do that more?